Thank you for choosing to do this lovely Christmas card video. What I'm going to do is talk through all the colours we're going to need, all of the equipment, and then we'll get started with the card. So on my palette I have got some red, ochre yellow, atlas blue and burnt umber. Now I'm going to use a number 12 brush, but you can use a number 6 brush. I would just suggest any round brush for this. And other things you might need is some water, a little bit of kitchen roll, a pencil and a fine liner. So I'm going to begin with my pencil, and the main thing is to make sure you start on the correct side of the card. I have done it many times where I've got really into a design, and then when I've gone to close it together I've realised that I've put the design on the wrong side. So make sure when you're putting it out you've definitely got the drawing or the design going on the right hand side. So what I'm going to do is start with my pencil, and I'm just going to create a very rough circle. So it might be worth just popping a little dot where the very centre point of your card is, just very lightly with a pencil. So I'm using a 2B pencil. You are more than welcome to use a HB or a 2H or something a little bit lighter. So I've got my centre, and then I'm going to use that to mark in a guide as to where I want my circle to go. So it's like for the wreath going all the way around. So I'm doing very, very light, sketchy pencil strokes. We're going to rub these out later, but it's just to give us an idea of where we're going to be putting our lovely leaves. And once we've got that on there and we're quite happy with the size of the circle, what we can do is pick up our first colour. So I'm going from the water into the paint. So I'm just getting a little bit of that ochre yellow, slightly more wet. So very, very small amount, because these are going to be the lightest colours. So I've got my ochre yellow, little bit of water, and I'm just going to start with this colour. So just the yellow by itself. Now, the best way to do this brushstroke is to press and drag and lift off all in one go. So you want to just use the tip of the brush to start with. I'm going to start over in this top right corner, so about 2 o'clock if you think of it like a clock face. And I'm starting by pressing very lightly with the tip of the brush, and then I'm pulling it in towards the circle. I'm pressing a bit harder so that the bristles all spread out, and I'm dragging it, and then I'm going to lift off so I get a nice point on the inside of my leaf. And that is the brush stroke that we're going to use all the way throughout. Now obviously you can mix this up a little bit if you want different sizes or ones that go slightly different ways. What I would do is just start with a really, really faint line to begin with. So you're just sort of marking in the tip with the tip of the brush, and then you can take it any direction. So you could push it down and in, and that one's slightly more curved. Now another thing you could do to make it look like there's some highlight without actually adding in any white is just to do another brush stroke that doesn't quite connect. So I'm starting at the same point, and then I'm leaving this big white open space here. And when everything else is on, all that does, it looks like that is a highlight on the leaf. So I'm just going to build it up one brush stroke at a time, moving my way around the circle. Now the thing with the composition is to try and not make every single one exactly the same as the one before. So I'm sort of alternating which way they go. So I'm doing one brush stroke going into the centre, and I'm doing another one slightly poking out. And each one is going to be a slightly different shape, different size, and it's kind of, each one is leaning or facing the way the circle's going, just to start with. And then once we've got the basic shape, we can then add little ones coming off the side, like these ones here, that slightly break away from the shape. So I've barely got anything on my brush, I've barely got any water or any paint, and they're coming out very, very lightly. Now the thing with watercolour is that it's better to just do very, very thin layers lots of times without overworking it too much. I'm going to keep going round anti-clockwise to begin with. So I'm going all the way from 2 o'clock round anti-clockwise to about 7 o'clock on this side, on the left hand side. And once we've done those bits, we're then going to change the direction of the brushstroke, going from 2 o'clock clockwise all the way around to 7. So I'm going to turn the brush the other way, so my tip of the brush is pointing down towards the right, and then we're just going to add lots of little leaves going all the way down. So just press and drag. Some of them can connect together, so you could have like 3 in a row all joining up. And that looks quite nice. So when we've done our first layer and we've got all those lovely yellow brush strokes on, what we can do is add a little bit of the Atlas blue into that ochre yellow. So we're going to make a very pastel-y kind of green. So I'm going to choose a couple of my yellow ones to paint over in this slightly sagey green, and I'm just going to repeat the same brush strokes. So I'm pressing and dragging. It's literally the same brush stroke over and over again. Careful about drips. I'm hoping that will just stay where it is. Please don't drip down. And then we can also start adding in some of those smaller ones just off to the side. So we do the same brush stroke, but I'm just going to lean them slightly out. Oh, so that time I had a bit more blue in that colour, so I'm just going to add a bit more yellow back in, just to make them a little bit more green. So the less pressure you put on the brush, the smaller those leaves are going to come out. So if you want really tiny little dashes, you just need to press super, super lightly and lift off. So with these ones, as well as overlapping the yellow ones that we've got, we can also add them in their own little spaces as well. So we can add some slightly bigger ones. We can maybe overlap some of those last ones as well. I might just do a couple more facing inwards and a few smaller ones just sticking out to the side. And then we're back at 7 o'clock, so we can do the same thing going the other way. It's very important every couple of seconds or every couple of minutes to just take a little lean back from the card and just make sure that everything is still quite circular and quite even. Now I've noticed that over on this side I've done loads and loads of brush strokes really quite thick, but I've not really done many on this side, so I'm just going to take a couple of seconds just to even things out slightly. Now I know we've still got a few layers to go, but it's good just to keep it in check in the early stages. So I'm quite happy with the shape of that now. I think I'm going to make a slightly more golden colour. So to get the nice golden colour, we're actually going to mix the yellow, the blue, so if I mix it just in here, so yellow and blue, and we're also going to introduce a very small amount of red. So it's a really, really subtle golden green, if there's such a thing. So we can overlap some of the ones that we've just done. We can also add new ones. It's kind of the same thing as last time, exactly the same sort of steps. But obviously we're just going down the shades of green. Now, a couple of those leaves that are all bunched up over on the left as well. And we can maybe start introducing a few more little rogue leaves just to add a little bit of something else to the shape. And I think I just need a couple of smaller ones just over at 2 o'clock, just sort of sticking out slightly. And then we can go in with a slightly darker colour. So I'm going to add even more of the blue. So I've got my ochre yellow, a little bit of red, and a bit more blue. So this is going to be the darkest colour we're going to use for the leaves, and then we're going to start adding in those branches and finish off with the berries dotted around. So I'm going to choose a couple of these leaves just to make a little bit darker. So I'm actually picking up a little bit more paint than before. So it's not quite as watery. And you might only paint like half of the leaf. So if you want to add a bit more of the highlight idea, you can actually pick out the shadows rather than leave the highlights. So you can mix it up between the two techniques. So on some of my darker ones, we can just press very lightly and just go around one side potentially, and it adds a really lovely effect. So we can do that on a few of those. I'm going to do a few more just a bit lower down. I might add a little bit more red back in just for that last step, just to make it a slightly more orangey green again. It's gone very, very brown over here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of red back in. And then I'm just going to take a lean back, make sure I'm happy with the shape of this. And I'm just probably going to add a few more over in the top. And I'm going to make another brighter green just to finish off before we do the branches. So I'm going to mix together my yellow and blue, just those two colours together, to go back to my original green. But I'm just picking up more paint this time. So these ones are going to be really good just to bring out the last bright colour. So you can overlap some of your old ones. You can introduce some new ones as well. And it's just about filling in the gaps without overworking one section too much. So try and keep it nice and balanced. And then when you're happy with all of your leaves, we're then going to mix together the ochre yellow with your burnt umber. So I've got some of my ochre yellow. We don't need a lot of this at all, so just mix up the tiniest amount. And I would say equal amounts of both so it doesn't start too dark. And I'm just picking up a little bit of each paint, moving it to a clean part of the palette. And I'm rolling my number 12 brush on its side, so I'm keeping a lovely point on the tip of the brush. And then what we're going to do is very, very lightly, just using the tip of the brush, I'm adding in very small scribbles almost, and I'm going through some of the gaps that we've got in between the leaves, kind of how we've got those pencil strokes. And we're just adding side to side brush strokes that don't exactly join up. They're just very, very messy. And we can add these in every gap that we see, or not every gap, but a few of the gaps that we can see going through the leaves. So they're kind of crossing over slightly, so they're, if you wiggle the brush a little bit, and then add another one that goes around, following the similar sort of shape. You might have some areas where the twigs might overlap some of the leaves, and that looks quite nice as well. So I'd keep these brush strokes very, very small, very short and choppy. And I'm just going to add a little bit more burnt umber this time. So I'm just gradually building it up, one shade at a time. I'm just going to go over some of those brush strokes with that darker colour. Now I've got a lot more paint on the brush than when we did those leaves. So that this time, these brush marks are coming out a lot darker. It might be nice having a few of them just poking out slightly to make it look a bit more twig-like. so they can sort of break away from the circles slightly. And I'm purposely putting a few more twigs showing up at 7 o'clock and at 2 o'clock because it's kind of where the leaves join together. So I'm adding in a kind of break in between all of those leaves. I'm going to do some slightly longer ones running across those leaves at about 4 o'clock. And then we're going to add some berries in. So I quite like the orange in this. I think the red by itself might be a little bit too much of a contrast with the subtle leaves that we've got going on. So I'm just going to mix my ochre yellow with a little bit of red. So we get a nice orange colour. So I'm mixing those two together with a little bit more water. And for this, we're just going to start with a very small dot, and then we can build up with little spirals as we go. So this is where your tissue will definitely come in very handy because it helps to take the paint off with the tissue to add the highlight in. So I'm going to pop some of my berries over on the top right and on the bottom left. So I'm kind of spreading them out on those two sections so there's a bit more of a focus. So my first bit is going to be about 2 o'clock, and I'm going to go in between my leaves over on the right. And I'm just going to start with a little dot, so I'm happy with where it's going. And then we can make the circle a little bit bigger. So I'm just gradually pushing the brush round until we're happy with the size of the berry. I might just go a little bit bigger. There we go. And then once we're happy with the size, so that's about the size of a hole punch hole, I think. And then we can just use the tissue. If we fold it, roll it round, so we've got a nice point. So I'm just taking a little bit of paint off the top left there, just so it looks like there's a little bit of highlight coming down from the top. And then we can repeat that wherever you want the berries to go. So I'm trying to vary the size of them as well. So I might just add a slightly smaller one, a little bit further round. So I'm starting with my little dot and then spiraling it out. And we can add the tissue and just lightly dot it. And then another small one just next to it as well. So definitely try and vary the size. Make sure none of them are exactly lining up together. So try and mix up where they're sitting. So I'm trying to put them mostly in threes. Apart from that bottom left corner, I'm just going to add 2 in. And I'm going to add 2 smaller ones off of that second one. And this is a really good way to balance things out. So if you've noticed that you've not got very many leaves on one section of your wreath, it might be a good idea to put these dots to fill in those gaps. So I've got a big gap here. I'm going to add a little dot. Roll the tissue. So if you want them to come out a little bit brighter, then you can pick up a little bit more paint and a bit less water. So the final step is to use your fine liner pen or an ink pen, whatever you want to use, just to write your little message in the centre. I'm going to stick with Merry Christmas, and then we can also pick out a few of these twigs just to be a little bit darker. So I'm actually going to start with that bit, and then we'll tackle the writing afterwards. So I'm just being very, very light with the pressure, just kind of going over some of those darker brown twig lines. I find it really hard to not overdo this bit. I find that the fine liner is such a satisfying step to add to any card that yeah, you don't want it to take away from the subtlety of the design. However, what you could do is actually go around some of these leaves if you wanted to with the fine liner, and that also does look very nice. It just depends what style you want to go for. So I'm trying to keep it very, very subtle and quite muted. So I'm not going to go too crazy with this bit. And then for Merry Christmas, or whatever you would like to add, it might be worth just using your pencil first. So I'm adding in like a ruler line as well. If you want to use a ruler, that's probably advised. So I've got an idea of where I want the words to sit, and then you can mark it in with pencil first, so you can write whatever you like. And personally, I found that with when you're writing things, I found that the quicker you do it, the better it comes out. Now that might just be me, but I would potentially have a little go at just writing what you want to write lots and lots of times on a fresh bit of paper, and then when you're ready, pop it on the card and you can go over it with your fine liner. So I'm just going to go very quickly. Keeping it quite messy, I think. And then you can go over the top with your rubber and rub out any pencil marks that might be left. If you are using an ink pen though, be very careful that you don't rub out too early, because that's when smudges happen and you don't want to then ruin your card on that very last step when you're rubbing out all those pencil strokes. So it might be worth just taking it through the wreath and going over some of those pencil strokes from before. And there we have our Christmas card design. Thank you so much for choosing to paint with me today. I really hope that you've enjoyed creating your watercolour Christmas card designs. Don't forget to take a photo, send them to us. We would absolutely love to see what you've created, and we hope you have a lovely Christmas.